People in the chat will most doubtedly recognise Chris from the Steam Locos in Profile and Soul Steam Loco in Profile series. So it's great to have you on, and your most recent DVD, the Steam Locos in Profile USA, came out it's a few months ago now. How is that doing? Because it's certainly I thoroughly enjoyed actually watching this, and it's one of the things. Whenever I watch any of your stuff, the episodes go by so quickly, which I think is always a good sign that something is very engaging and very enjoyable. When it's just like, oh, is that the end already? Really enjoyed this, but I'm guessing that there's a lot of work gone into this, not least because you've had to travel over to America. And did you do it all, the filming, in one go, or were there several trips to get everything in?
Well, so much I got to answer there. So, first of all, it's I always feel a little bit out of my depth whenever I come on the Monday Club, because I haven't actually done any railway modelling as such since about 2006. So, because I've always kind of dabbled in like full-size railways ever since then. So it's really sweet of you guys to have me on. So, thanks very much, and thank you everybody who tunes in for even tuning into me. I feel honoured even if one person tunes into what I do. It's just so humbling. Regarding the US trip, it was a lot of hard work. It had its great hardships, but overall it was an absolute blast. And it's been beautifully received by everyone who's seen it so far. I haven't had a bad word to say about it. Well, maybe there was one one of the magazines did say perhaps it was a little bit on the pricey side, but that can be a matter of opinion. And I still hand out more content for less than, people like Telerail and Transport Video Publishing, or at least I feel that I have to, if you will.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, I have to come to your defence here, because there's 10 programs on this, so it's not a short DVD. There's a lot of content on here, and a lot of variety as well. And that was something that struck me when we were watching it. It's not dealing with the same sort of topics in each episode. There's some very different railways, and some of the subjects that you cover, I'd never heard of, and that's what I like about your stuff. We had the same with the Manx and miniatures. I found it really interesting to learn about preserved railway schemes that I never knew about. And again, you've delivered that on the Steam Locos in Profile USA with things like I'd heard of the Mount Washington Cog Railway, but it's certainly very interesting to see that. But then, the whole load on the Shays, the Porters, the Berkshires. Is it Berkshires or Berkshires? Because the Americans like to pronounce things differently.
Over there, for some reason, it's Berkshires. I'll never understand why. It's mainly because of the hills in Massachusetts, and then there's the Berkshire Hills, which is where the initial 284s were tested, and that's how they earned their nickname. But yeah, over there it's Berkshires, but over here it's Berkshires because of Berkshire County.
Yeah, we're posh. But no, I thought it was a great cross range of different subjects. And of course, this was, I remember originally you were doing a fundraiser to be able to produce this. And how difficult was that to kind of sell the project in advance to people, to get the money to be able to go out there and produce this?
It was a nerve-wracking experience, to say the least. Not least because of the sheer amount of money that I had to raise, needed to raise. Because when you're crowdfunding something, you have to sort of plan everything a good, at least 2 months or so in advance, just to get the best prices on, flights and so on. But then you've got to sort of allow a certain degree of certain margin for error, because if you're planning with what I was doing, I had to plan everything like a year or so in advance at least. Yeah. And so I was relying on inflation not going up too much, and thank goodness it didn't go up until the very end of the trip. Yeah. I'll try not to get political here, but it's a good thing that I sort of came home shortly after Liz Truss came to power, because that's when the pound really crashed.
Because it got to it got to nearly parity at one point, which is unprecedented. Although,
well, let's put it this way: when I was costing the project up, sort of December 2020 or thereabouts, the exchange rate was hovering around 70 to 72 pence to the US dollar. When I then went out there at April 2022, it was hovering around 82 pence per US dollar, and then when I came home it was around 93 pence per US dollar, so it jumped all over the place when I was out there.
See,
so yeah, it was
when you're trying to do a project like this, that must be so nerve-wracking that even just a shift in the exchange rate can mess up everything you had planned. Because I seem to recall this where you had like initial goals for what you wanted to film, and then you had stretch goals whereby, you know, if a certain amount was reached, then you could go and film X. If another target was met, you could go and film something else. So did you meet all of the targets that you set, or was there more that you would have liked to have gone and filmed?
Well, thankfully I did manage to reach all of the targets and have a little bit in the pot to make a 10th film. Initially I mapped out the idea of producing up to 9 episodes. So if I raised £5,000, I'll be able to do 1 film. If I raised 10,000, I'll be able to do 3, 15,000, I'll be able to do 5, etc, etc, etc. And thankfully there was enough in the kitty to produce a 10th one, and thank goodness it just came about the way that it did. There were some changes that I had to make in the planning stage. Like there was one film I wanted to produce about the Sierra Railway Number 3, which is a locomotive that was used in many film productions over the years. It was in Petticoat Junction, the Casey Jones Show. It was the engine that was used in Back to the Future Part 3, where it's cascaded off the end of the canyon of the ravine. But unfortunately, it suffered boiler problems even before I got a chance to go out there. And Railtown 1997 in Jamestown, California, who look after the engine, said, "I'm afraid we're not returning it to service this year." So I had to replace it with something else. But lo and behold, fans of the show were able to tell me what it was they wanted me to do instead, and it just came off nicely. So thanks again to everybody who gave to the campaign. I don't know what I'd do without you guys, honestly.
Absolutely.
You're awesome.
And how different is the preservation scene out in the US compared to the UK? Because it's something that perhaps doesn't necessarily come across on film as much, but I'm curious how Americans view rail fanning, preservation of steam locomotives, and going and taking trips on preserved lines. Compared with, say, how it's viewed in the UK.
It's interesting in that it's very much like America itself, in that it's similar and yet it's so completely different. So the people who are into it in a really big way. But it's a much more, I suppose it has to be a much more commercialized sector than it is over in the UK. Because, again, without getting too political about it, but the American working lifestyle doesn't allow as much paid vacation and free time as the UK one. So over here, most jobs, most employers give you 20, 25, 30, 35 days leave per year. Yeah. In America, you're very lucky to get more than 1 week's paid leave a year. So there's very little free time in many occupations, really. So there's a lot more sort of paid staff. There's a lot more seasonal operations. Stuff doesn't really tend to happen until about late April, early May.
Right.
And then November, the fall time, is when the photo charters come out in force because everyone's gone indoors for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And then January, February, and March, and most of April is when most places have just stopped running altogether for maintenance and so on. So it's a more seasonal operation over in the US than it is over in the UK, but it's still a big thing, and there's still so many interesting variables and changes over there than there is over here. Like over here, if you want to track a rail tour on the main line, you have to look up the times on real-time trains, or hopefully have someone on board and keep you updated with where the train is and at each of the timings. Whereas in the US, there's a website where you can literally legally hack, I should say, the radio exchanges between the crews and dispatch offices, so you can pinpoint exactly when a train is moving off by the radio communication.
Wow. And certainly in the UK, we were very lucky with the likes of Barry Scrapyard. So we've actually got quite a representative fleet of a lot of the locomotives that lasted to the end of BR Steam. In the US, is there anything comparable to that? I mean, how did locomotives enter preservation in the US? Was it a different route, or was it private individuals buying them? Or was there much more of an impetus for the actual railroads themselves to preserve items of their locomotives?
Well, it varies from state to state, I think. It's interesting how a lot of American railroad preservationists told me when I was out there that the easy thing that they found was that it was easy for them to snatch a load of stuff up that was being decommissioned, but then actually doing something with it, restoring it and running it, was the difficult bit. So if you go to a lot of just random railroad museums around several towns in the US, you'll often come across lines of stored locomotives and wagons and so on just lying around on display. So yeah, there's a lot of unrestored stuff over there. But having said that, there is like I say, the ones who are into it in a big way, and as such, a lot of stuff is out there in small pockets, but the enthusiasm for it is still very strong, and as such, it's still, there's still a wide variety of stuff out there that's still running, which is, it's always a nice thing to see.
And one of the things that actually I found quite interesting was certainly in the American 440 film on the Steam Locos and Profile USA, it was interesting to hear about how the American film industry, how Hollywood had actually played a huge role in preserving quite a lot of the older locomotives, purely, I guess, for being used as props in westerns and such like. But I found that fascinating, that locomotives that would have otherwise been scrapped by the 20s and 30s were preserved because of that rather interesting and unique route. I mean, was that something that was very apparent when you were over there in terms of the types of locomotives that have been preserved?
To be honest, that was a culture shock for me as much as it would be for anybody, really. I mean, the whole story, to give some context of what Jenny's saying, everybody, in the 1930s, Paramount Pictures preserved a fleet of locos from the old Virginia and Truckee Railroad out in Nevada. So there were mostly, it was mostly 440s and, loads of other, at the time, redundant rolling stock, some of which had been around since the mid-1870s. So that's why a lot of stuff featured in things like Disney's adaptation of The Great Locomotive Chase in 1956, and things like the original Wild Wild West, not the rubbishy remake with Will Smith and so on, but the TV series of which it was based on. And just lots of stuff like that. But it was interesting how you wouldn't think that a film studio would be up for preserving steam locomotives. So, that was a surprise for me as much as it would be for anybody, I dare say. But I think that's probably the main reason why so much stuff from that particular era and that particular shape, the classic 440, became such a global icon in history. Because
certainly, I mean, in the UK, we don't have anywhere nearly as much preserved locomotives and stock from that kind of period, the 1860s, 1870s. And it felt when watching the programme that there was a lot that had been preserved because of this need by Hollywood to have things they could use to shoot westerns as that genre got really big. And I just found that immensely fascinating. And it's something that I found with all of your films, is that the depth of the research, it doesn't bog you down, in fact, but it presents them in a very accessible way. And it's kind of, it's what you call making learning fun. And I just found that really, really great when watching this. How much time would you spend doing research for each of these episodes?
I would say that I'm probably spending every waking possible moment on the films in some way, shape or form. When it's not research or writing, it's filming, it's editing, it's doing the music, it's recording the voiceover. It's, just trying to make the thing coherent, because the thing about research is that it's important to do as much of it as possible, but then when you're presenting it to a blanket audience, it's important for it to come across in a way that doesn't talk down to them. It puts them on the same level as yourself, so that they know it is what you're talking about, and they're interested in what it is you're talking about. Because you can spout out facts and figures and say blah 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 all the time, but as soon as if you just spout out too much at once, then it just goes straight over people's heads, and that's always a really difficult thing to try and get right. But at the same time, it's important not to spout out too little and make it too pathetically obvious. I remember I was about 2 years ago, I interviewed someone who who used to produce railway documentary programs for the BBC, stuff like The Train Now Departing and All Change at Evercreech Junction, and that classic era of when railway TV was at its best, I would say. And the thing that he said, something which I think is something that any producer of railway content could take forward, is that it's important not to talk down to a railway audience, because they know a lot and they're going to spot every mistake. And that mistake will haunt you for the rest of your life. I remember my partner and I were watching that new program with John Sargent and Piglet the other day on Channel 5, the great steam adventure across the UK. And there was one sequence where they were travelling up the East Coast Main Line behind Duchess of Sutherland. And in one shot, the engine was in LMS Crimson Lake, and then the next shot, she was in the BR green that she wore a couple of years prior. So you could tell that this program had been shot over several years.
Yeah.
And I was just looking at that and thinking, I've chased steam engines up the East Coast Main Line and beaten them to many locations. It's not difficult to get the continuity right on the same day, guys. You could have taken me on as a cameraman, and I could have chased it for you and got that stock. Come on.
I mean, it makes me think of when I did Great Model Railway Challenge. In the credits for that, they've actually reversed a bit of footage. And the thing that you can't do with a steam locomotive is reverse it, because it looks very peculiar as it sucks all the smoke back in. And everybody, it stuck out like a sore thumb. So I know exactly where you're coming from with that. But I mean, how long have you been into filmmaking? Is this something that you've always been interested in, or has it come about later in life?
It's something which I've been interested in for a while, but it wasn't my first love. So my first love has always been steam engines. Ever since I was a boy, I had train sets, and we used to visit places like the National Railway Museum and the Bluebell and Kent East Sussex and so on when I was a kid. There was Thomas on the TV, of course, as there would be at that period. And, he helped in his own way. So, I've always been big into steam engines in a big way. When I was leaving school, I knew that I wanted to do something on them for a living, but I wasn't quite sure what. And at first I thought that something would be engineering. So I undertook a mechanical engineering apprenticeship, and I worked for a small engineering firm for a couple of years. And that was interesting in its own way. But after a couple of years, growing up in the environment where you're the apprentice, you're the youngest in the firm by 30 odd years, you end up being the butt of quite a lot of the stuff that goes on. You end up being the blamed for things which aren't even your fault. And that sort of put me off a bit. But then I sort of had this wild dream, I suppose, when I was 22 or so. After seeing a couple of things on the TV and on home video about railways. Back in 2008, BBC4 started launching more fresh railway content, like Julia Bradbury's Railway Walks, and they were showing that alongside classic stuff from the 80s, like Steam Days and so on. And I thought, well, these look really nice, but there's not much about locomotives specifically. So it was well produced and everything, but the information was a little bit lackluster, I felt, perhaps. I'm sure other people would have their own opinions on it. And then I started rewatching stuff which came out on VHS and DVD, like the old Castle Video VHS tapes about various steam locos from the Big Four and from British Railways. And there I found that there was almost this polar opposite going on in terms of production. The information was all there, and the research had clearly been done. But the editing was perhaps a little bit lackluster. I thought the sound mixing was a bit off in some places, and the commentary from Peter Woods, while really good, he was a great voice, but there were times when I thought the mixing and editing could have been a little bit better, and maybe the shot variety from the camera work could have been a little bit more interesting. And then, sort of 2009, Top Gear did that race with Tornado from London to King's Cross against the Jaguar and the bike, and I thought, I looked at that, at the way that was shot and edited, and thought, why the hell haven't rail fans got this equivalent? This is fantastic. This is how you make steam engines look exciting. And then, random thought, it escaped my mind for another 6 months, and then I came back from a concert from Wembley Arena late one night. I think it was December. This is December 2009 we've come up to now. And I was getting that sort of post-gig buzz from seeing one of your favourite bands live, Status Quo, by the way, for those who are interested. And I went immediately to YouTube to try and find clips of the gig that I'd just been to. Couldn't find anything, but in my search, I came across various reviews from people who were talking about classic films, old TV shows from their childhood, toys, video games, etc., etc. But there was nothing on steam engines. I thought, oh, YouTube's obviously this great launch pad for people who can't get into film or television. Why don't I use it? Why don't I see if I could produce something like, more than just a generic railway montage of a day out at a gala weekend or something? Why don't I see if I can review steam engines myself? I'm going to go there and use that phrase, how hard can it be? So, yeah, I invested in a video camera and some various bits of equipment. I did a crash course in television presenting at an academy in London, and I've hardly looked back since. Good God, it's really been that long since I started doing it. I just realised it was in 2009 I came up with the idea.
I know, time does go past quick, doesn't it? And it's one of the things that I do love about your presentation is that there's a lot of thought gone into the visual aspect of it, making the cuts and the angles interesting. And some of the shots that really stood out for me with this was you've put cameras so that they're filming the motion of the locomotive as it's going along. And I think there's even one scene that you're actually filming the train coming in one of those concave mirrors. And I just thought, like, little interesting things like that. And it's doing for trains what Top Gear did for cars. And it's something in the, I don't know whether you caught the opening of the show. But for me, I'm not a car person. Take 'em or leave it. But the thing that Top Gear did was it made it accessible to the masses. It made it interesting and enjoyable to watch. And you didn't have to be a complete car nerd to really get a lot out of that. And I find your style very similar to that. Have you been inspired by any other presenters, any other specific productions? Or have you tended to try and experiment a lot? How have you approached developing your style?
So I suppose I developed little bits from lots of people into my style. So yeah, there's the editing style and the color correction and so on does lend a lot of it to itself to Top Gear, that era of Top Gear specifically. But in terms of presentation values and, level of research and the amount of coherent, the way that information is brought across, it's really, it really comes from any number of places. So some of it comes from David Lean, from films like Bridge on the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia. Some of it comes from Buster Keaton. I'm not a huge fan of using digital effects, so I like to try and do as much stuff tangibly as possible.
Yeah.
And if that involves me doing any kind of dangerous stunts, then I'll do it. I remember one of the first things I did when I was at university was a short 5-minute film about a train spotter who tries to go for that perfect shot and tries to go for it by any means necessary. It's called Blindside. If anyone wants to check it out, feel free, but there's no obligation.
So is that on YouTube?
Yeah, it's on my channel. It's one of the first things I ever did, so it probably shows its age a little bit. Interesting thing I just remembered about that, Simon A.C. Martin was my cameraman for most of that shoot, so big thanks to him. And yeah, there's bits that come from David Lean, bits from Buster Keaton. A lot of it tends to come from, rock stars of the 70s and 80s. So, if a lot of filming with slips, I will say it feels very much like being in a rock band that's just about to make it big but hasn't quite got there. Because there's a lot which I do have to sacrifice. There's a lot of hard work. There's a lot that is done for the sake of not great amounts in return. People think that because you're in show business that you have an easy life, and if people assume that because you are famous that you're on easy street, that
you go to bed at night on a big stack of cash, and it's not the case, is it?
Not always, no. Well, certainly not in my case. I'm barely able to get by with the rent every month.
Yeah, you and me both. And it's unfortunately, I think it's something that the rise of social media, of YouTube, and there's a lot of people that look at it and go, "Oh, it's a 15-minute video. It can't have taken you more than 15 minutes to put that together," and they think that you're making mega money, but actually, it's more about a labour of love. You do it because you love what you're doing. And if you actually worked out your hourly rate, it would be pitiful.
Yeah, if I was to charge a proper wage for what I did, then it would be off the scale, and nobody would want to pay for it. So, I mean, let's put it this way: there's a reason why I needed to raise £35,000 to go to the States and not 3,000, because I was out there for 6 months. I was darting literally back and forth everywhere from Portland, Maine in the east all the way out to Portland, Oregon in the west. I think I worked this out the other day. I think I've traveled about 43,000 miles when I was in the States.
And presumably it's not just you there. There's other people as well.
Well, there's various friends who are helping me out, for sure. People like I had a friend out in Baltimore who I was able to use as my base when I was in the eastern states. Cheers, James, if you're watching, for helping me out. And with various people out at various railroads who were able to help me out with various bits and pieces along the way. So shout out to Anthony at who used to be with the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad. Shout out to Ray from the Southern California Railroad Museum for taking me around the western states. Shout out to Chris Walters, who joined me in Colorado. Shout out to Chris Homan over in Pennsylvania, who helped me out with various bits and pieces there, like the Reading Northern and the Harrisburg, Lincoln, and Lancaster. Shout out to Dan Gilliam, who helped me with the music down in Texas. If I've forgotten names, I do apologize. There were so many people who did help me out. Thank you very much. You're all awesome people. Don't ever stop. I don't know what else to say other than without repeating myself. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing is, one of the things that I've loved about YouTube, especially, is the community. There's so many great people who will help out, and in return, it's great to help them as well. But where can people find your DVDs? If people are listening and thinking, "I like the sound of that," where's the best place to go to find your DVDs? I mean, we've talked about Steam Locos Improved Profile USA, the newest one, but you've got quite a back catalogue, and I believe there's some of the older ones. You've done a new print run, so some of the older ones will now be available again.
Yeah, so I've got... Oh, how many have I got now? I've got 5 other volumes before Manx and Miniatures, and then there's the US one, which is available on DVD and Blu-ray and digital download for anyone who's interested, as well as various other bits and pieces. So the primary place to get them is my website, my online shop, which is www.e-gmedia.co.uk/shop. Shameless plug is shameless, I'm sorry to say. Otherwise, I tend to try and publish the newer episodes for a short free stint on YouTube before they go on DVD and download. And the reason for that is because while YouTube's ad revenue is pitiful, I do understand that, you know, people coming into the show for the first time would like to have a basic idea of what it looks like, and then have the choice as to whether or not they want to actually have it for themselves, you know. The only contrarian part of that is that YouTube has yet to provide a way to stop people from downloading stuff for free. So, you know, my hands are really tied in that sense. I do want to give stuff out and, you know, provide those who can't afford nice things with nice things, but at the same time, I've got to, you know, make my living so I can have nice things myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what can you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And are you working on the next project yet? Have you got ideas of what you want to cover next?
I suppose at this point we should get the announcements out of the way so that, so that you can stop asking me that question. First, so there's 3 announcements which I really ought to get out of the way. First thing is that as of today, I'm reissuing a new run of one of the oldest pieces that one of my camera crew and I worked on about 9 years ago now, which was coverage of the London Underground's 150th anniversary celebrations in 2013. So this is steaming back to Metroland. I'll try and get this a little bit close to the camera so it's not reflecting. So this is an hour's worth of coverage of the London Underground 150 celebrations, including the return of Steam on the Met. For the first time, I think, since the year 2000 was the last time that they ran it. So we got coverage of Met 1 and the Pannier Tank 9466 and the small prairie that was started up in London Underground colours as L150. I think it was Metropolitan Red, but please, someone do correct me if I was wrong.
I think it was the same livery that they did the Class 20s in, wasn't it? So they kind of matched.
Yeah, that's right. So they look quite smart in that livery, I think. I'm not a big fan of diesels, I'm sorry to say. Anyone who wants to shoot me now, go ahead. But, you know, I do... In that livery, the Class 20s did look quite smart, I'm glad to say. The only thing that looked slightly out of place for me was the fleet of Mark I coaches, which they sort of tarted up to look like they were made of wood. Thought that didn't quite work.
Right,
but,
yeah.
You know... you couldn't exactly run the Met set at 60 mile an hour on the tube. So there we are.
Absolutely. A couple of final questions. One of the things that I've noticed comes up an awful lot, and it's a bit like the Blue Peter thing, where everything's measured in terms of double-decker buses, Olympic-sized swimming pools. I did notice that your favoured method of comparison measurement is the Brighton Terrier. It did come up a lot. Can we take from that that's probably one of your favourite locomotives, or one that you've become very familiar with?
Maybe not one of my favourites per se. I do like them. I do like Terriers, mainly because I used to work on the Bluebell Railway in Sussex many years ago, and I did help to overhaul Stepney during her last stint in traffic. So I sort of became acquainted with them, but the reason why I reference Terriers and 4Fs and stuff like that so much is because I think they are a well-known, suitable yardstick. You know, a lot of rail fans appreciate, they know how heavy they are, they roughly know what the tractive effort is, and what the fuel capacity is like. Many of them would know what their pulling power was. So, you know, if you can, it comes back to that thing of coherence I was coming back to earlier on. If you can process the information in a way that other people can go, oh, so that's what it's like, I understand that, I get that reference, then, you know, that's what helps to draw them in. And if you can compare to locos which people might be familiar with, then, you know, that helps to sort of make the comparison.
Absolutely. And If there was a locomotive that didn't survive, that you could magic up and have survive, what would be your choice for? The
$64 million question.
Yeah, if you could fire
if money were no object.
Yeah, if you could fire up the DeLorean and go back and save one loco that didn't get saved, is there a particular one?
Stania Turbomotive in original form. I think that was, if steam technology was going to go places after the conventional reciprocating piston engine, that was probably where the technology was going to be taken. And I think had World War II not intervened, then who knows, maybe we could have ended up with steam turbine technology really taking off in this country instead of just being in the experimental stage. I was reading about it the other day and found that in original form, 6202 Turbomotive racked up 128,000 miles in 18 months. How crazy is that?
That is actually pretty good. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I must admit, there's a part of me thinking that that's the engineer in you, because you've immediately homed in on the engineering, the technology side of it. I was quite surprised. I thought you'd say something like Beachy Head, a locomotive like the H2 Atlantic, which nearly got preserved, but because they couldn't raise the money at the time, they didn't. Or the Z class as well as another one. But no, it's interesting to hear your thoughts on the Turbomotive, and certainly it's one of the things that I have noticed in the US. They seem to have embraced newer technologies far more than in the UK in terms of things like gas turbines. We dabbled with that with the GT3, and later on the very first HSTs had the Rolls-Royce Tyne turbines, and then BR got cold feet and ended up going with the Paxman diesels. But no, it's just interesting that a lot of this technology seems to have had a lot more traction in the US, if you pardon the pun. But look, anyway, it's been really great to chat with you. And getting an insight into the films, and I'm really looking forward to the next one. And as I said at the beginning, for me it's like the Top Gear of railway films, accessible even for the Cupboard Monkey's not a trained person, but we sat in bed watching them, and she said, I'm really enjoying this, and it's a very amicable style of presenting, almost like Richard Hammond, I'd guess, is the person that you remind me of a lot. That presentation style with the energy, but that fun edge. So keep up the good work, and thank you so much for taking some time out to come on the Monday Club.
Well, thanks for having me on it in the first place. Like I say, I always feel a little bit out of my depth whenever I come here, but being accepted like this is just really sweet of you, and it's sweet of everyone who tunes into the chat. So everyone who has listened to me mumble on tonight, thank you very much for making the time.
It's always nice to get sort of into the actor's studio sort of thing, seeing the process behind producing such things, and it's great to get that side of things. But look, thank you so much. I'm very conscious I've kept you for quite a long time now, so I'm going to let you get on, but thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll catch up with you again at some point.
Thank you very much again, Jennifer. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everybody over on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to our Patreon heroes. Without you guys over on Patreon, we really wouldn't be able to keep making the video content that you see on this channel. And don't forget that you can also head on over to patreon.com/Jennifer Kirk and check out the different tiers of rewards. Thank you so much. You are absolute legends.